Welcome to the show. I'm Lily Nuno, and I'm here at Long Beach City College with Greg Schell, director of Chasing the Lotus. Nice to see you tonight.
Nice to be here.
Your background, you started working on films, and you won an award in 7th grade.
When I was in 7th grade, I entered this National History Day contest, and I thought it'd be a good idea to maybe make a little short video based on my family's history.
Yes.
And it got entered into this big competition. I took first place, and so at a very early age, I said, well, maybe this is something I should do, something I should pursue. And ever since then, I've been interested in making films, and especially historical films.
Mm-hmm. And you went on to college, and what inspired you to pursue it even a little bit further?
When I went to UC Santa Barbara, all I wanted to do was sit on the beach and go surfing. I mean, that was my whole life. Coming out of high school, I'd met a bunch of surfers, and they had introduced me to the sport. And when I went to UCSB, I decided, well, maybe I can take my passion for surfing and for filmmaking, kind of mold them together. So I started studying film. But it wasn't until I went to grad school up in San Francisco that I realized that, okay, yeah, I should try and make a film that has, both elements, the surfing element and the documentary feel.
Mm-hmm.
And that's where The Far Shore came out of.
And then you came up with Chasing the Lotus, where you met Greg Weaver and Spider Wills, correct? And tell me a little bit about meeting them and how this actual project got started.
Well, I was editing my first film, The Far Shore, in a post-production house in LA. And a guy stuck his head in and he said, hey, is this your movie? And I said, yes. And he said, well, I'd like to talk to you in my office when you're done. So I went into his office, and it turns out that he had met Greg Weaver and Spider Wills, and said that Greg and Spider had all of this archival footage from the 70s and 80s and even into the early 60s. And it was all surf and skateboard related. Can you take a look at this? So I sat and I watched it all, and sure enough, there was so much material there, I knew it would make a really interesting documentary about the history of the sport. So I kind of put all that footage together and did all the interviews, and that's how Chasing the Lotus was born.
How was it that you were able to get all these old surfers to come about and actually speak on this topic? Was it because of the old footage that you got them to do the actual documentary?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. I noticed that a lot of these people are hard to find, but the people I did find were very, very interesting because they usually had a really good recollection of what it was like back in the 60s and 70s. And so I went back and found as many people as I could, and the first thing I would do is I would show them some footage from 1974, and I'd say, look, this is you, in Bali, and they would watch the film, and then of course that would immediately spark all these memories in it.
What was the most memorable experience out of doing this whole project, this documentary? Even the person that you met that was most fascinating to you?
That's a good question. I think the most fascinating person that I interviewed was Jerry Lopez. Jerry Lopez is known as Mr. Pipeline. He was the guy in the late 70s who took that crown from guys like Butch Van Arsdalen and Jock Sutherland. And he has an incredible memory. I mean, he can recall things that happened on some day in 1974 in Maui. I just don't know how he knew who was surfing out that day, what kind of board he was riding, who shaped that board. So it was really fun to talk to Jerry. And also he had asked me if I ever tried yoga before, and I said, yeah, I did yoga. And he said, well, let's do a little yoga, let's warm up before the interview. So we actually did some yoga together. So that was kind of cool, doing yoga with Jerry Lopez.
Do you feel you could relate more to these people that you interviewed and you actually did all this research on because you're a surfer as well?
I think that helps. I think that being a surfer myself and being sort of obsessed with it since 8th grade, I really had a great understanding of the culture and a knowledge of the history. And so when I sat down with someone like Jerry Lopez or Rory Russell or someone who has lived through these eras, I was able to ask pertinent questions because I knew. I mean, it's like Bob Costas, the guy understands so much about football and baseball and basketball that when he sits down with, Julius Erving or Michael Jordan, he has an entire history to draw upon. Well, that's the same thing with anyone who's doing a documentary. You have to do your research.
Yes. How would you say the title Chasing the Lotus is like a metaphor? Is it kind of a metaphor for you accomplished this and now there's greatness even with your project?
Yeah.
That's kind of...
Yeah, Chasing the Lotus comes from this idea that You know, surfers are always out there chasing perfection.
Yes.
You know, it's either the perfect wave or the perfect sunset. If you're a photographer, it's that perfect image that's going to be on the cover of Surfer magazine. And it kind of spans that whole idea of, you know, finding those ephemeral moments that are perfect.
Where was your favorite location when going out and shooting this, or even interviewing people?
I think my favorite time was when I was making this film. I think my favorite location had to be Kauai. We had several people we had to interview over there, and so my producer says, well, we're just going to have to fly you to Kauai. And I was like, all right, okay, if you got to fly me to Kauai, I guess I'll go to Kauai. Yeah. So I flew out to Honolulu Bay, which is this beautiful valley overlooking the ocean, in above, like Princeville is above this valley, Honolulu Valley. And I went to Kauai, and I interviewed Dick Brewer, and I interviewed Sonny Garcia and a couple other people. And just the week of being in Kauai, in this little, you know, it's almost like a microcosm of just like cool hippie Kauai people.
Yeah.
You know, there were country stores selling vegan, you know, food, and a real sense of organic, you know, a love for the planet, a real mana, you know, a real Hawaiian spirit there. And I just fell in love with the place.
Jeff Bridge is involved in this project. He's a famous person. You know, you never know if he's available. How'd you get him on the job?
Yeah, that was one of those fortuitous moments that happens every once in a while for a filmmaker. I had a rough cut finished of Chasing Lotus, and I just thought, you know, maybe if, you know, the stars align, I'm going to go ahead and send a copy of this to his agent.
Yeah.
Well, it got to Jeff, and it was many months later. You know, we had already forgotten that we even sent him the film, and we get a phone call one day. He says, look, Jeff watched your movie, he really loves it, he really wants to do the narration. So it was like one of those great moments where we just said, okay, this is fantastic. And then we realized, oh shoot, we got to pay Jeff Bridges now. But he was very sweet. He, like, you know, he realized that we didn't have a huge budget for the film, so he took it easy on us. But he was really great to work with, and I'm really proud that I was able to pull off working with Jeff for this movie.
Was he able to get the movie noticed as well? Did that give people more of an insight of, oh, this film's out there?
I think that having Jeff Bridges in the film really opened up a lot of doors. I think people came to see Chasing Lotus that normally probably wouldn't. But the fact that, you know, Jeff Bridges is the dude, you know, he has this persona that everybody loves, I think a lot of people just responded to that. And I actually talked to people in the audience after some of the screenings, and they said, oh yeah, I just came here because I'm a big fan of Jeff Bridges, and ended up really liking the movie. So yeah, I think it's true that Jeff Bridges definitely lends a kind of mainstream affectation to the doc.
Definitely. Where can we actually look for this video?
If you're interested in seeing Chasing Lotus, you can go to chasingthelotus.com, and you can go into almost any surf shop in the US and beyond, and you can probably just buy it right in the surf shop itself.
And it's a great documentary. I definitely recommend it. Do you have any words to say about this film to the viewers?
Well, I would just say that, you know, if anyone, you know, if someone walks away from my film inspired, then I've really done what I set out to do.
Okay, Greg, how'd you get all this money to start this project, and in general, so you could travel and find out all these beautiful things?
Chris Bell, who did the soundtrack for Chasing Lotus, was also my producer. And I couldn't have made this movie without Chris, because he was the financial backbone and also really the kind of, you know, driving, producing force. And I just was able to, you know, steer the train.
Well, thank you so much, Greg. It was a pleasure.
Thank you.
I'm Lily Nuno with Greg Schell at Long Beach City College. Thank you for joining us.